Hi everybody, my name is Jo and I love to read. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. This is going to be my September and October reading wrap up. I was about to reach for the first book that I finished in September, but I've actually given it to the person that I bought it for, and that is my dad. For Father's Day this year, I read The Wager by David Cran. It's a non-fiction. This book was about a shipwreck of an English ship in about the 1700s. The hook of the story is that two separate groups of the men came back months apart on these makeshift boats, and the twist being that they had different opposing views on who was right and who was wrong and whether mutiny and murder was committed. I've tried to give my dad books in the past before, especially when I did not read non-fiction myself, and it hasn't often gone very well. Not having vetted the books myself, often dad would say that they were okay on topics that he liked, because I knew that much, but that the authors often spent a lot of time talking about how they'd done research, which my dad wasn't super interested in. He was more interested in reading the true life stuff, but written as a story. So when I heard about The Wager on Murphy Napier's channel and the way that she described it, that it was written like a story, I thought that would be the perfect book to give it a try, and I wanted to try it myself. And then because I have started annotating in the last 12 months, I thought that that would be a really fun thing to also do, so that my dad can essentially read it with me. Now, I had a great time in this book. It was really easy to forget that it was non-fiction, sort of in a way. I mean, I say that because non-fiction has not been something that's super easy for me to read. I am, as I'm reading it a little bit more, starting to gauge what I'm going to enjoy and how to pick things that I'm going to enjoy, and based on how people review them. But it's still a little bit hit and miss sometimes. Luckily for me, this one was really good and I was really glad to read it. So that's what I mean when I say that it didn't feel like non-fiction, because I still haven't really correlated in my brain that non-fiction can be fun. You've just got to pick the right authors, like any book. I like the way the author provided evidence for what he was saying in the book. He often would cite during the narrative that this particular sailor mentioned this in his journals. The sailors apparently kept lots of journals in those days, some detailed, some not. Sometimes referencing the journals was a little bit to the downfall of the flow of the book. Sometimes I felt like the author really wanted to use specific passages, but they were sometimes a little bit clunkily written, so that was hard, but most of the time they was pretty spot on. And I think I have this trouble with the author overall, because sometimes he would write paragraphs, and particularly end of chapters, that would hit really hard, and then sometimes they would just not make the impact on me that they were supposed to have. But on the whole, I really enjoyed this book. It was really interesting detail of the account. I learnt a lot. I was quite horrified about the conditions that they had on the ships. As like a little side note that's not a spoiler, but to kind of explain what I mean, apparently back in those days, not apparently, but back in those days, they would allow for 50% of the crew to die. That's how horrible the conditions were on those ships, and myself not having read any book about accurate seafaring back in those days, it was a real eye-opener, especially just the effects of scurvy and stuff like that. This isn't even people that come into contact with warring ships. This is just the conditions and how hard it was to keep the sailors in such good condition with being not on land for such a long time. The next book I finished was a manga, and that is volume 3 of Snow White with the Red Hair by Sarata Akiduki. This manga is about a girl called Shirayuki who, after trying to escape like a horrible situation in her own country, goes to the neighboring one. There she meets a mysterious stranger who helps her out, who ends up being the second prince of this kingdom, and she decides to then move closer to the castle and continues her career as a herbalist, but now at the castle as a court herbalist. This volume goes a bit more into the backstory of Zen side of things, so the prince sides of things, when we get a character from his life coming back into it who was away. That was quite interesting and led for some sort of tense moments between the characters. I'm still waiting for like this confession of love that hasn't happened yet, and I'm hoping that sometime soon it might be in here. There's a lot of talk about Shirayuki being the prince's special friend and what that means and stuff like that, like sort of overcoming the class structure and things like that. You know, what's a high up prince wanting with like a lowly herbalist? That kind of innuendo, which has sort of brought like an interesting dynamic to the relationship. It's a fluff read again. I'm enjoying it. There is a bit of substance in the terms of like loyalty to people and people's worth being about them and not their class structure, so there's a little bit in there, but it's, for me, I'm just finding it at the moment as like a more fun, enjoyable read. I don't really have much more to say about this one, but that I will be continuing with the series, definitely. I was on the fence after reading the first one. Pretty sure I decided after reading the second, but definitely after this third one I'm going to be continuing on with the series. It's not something that makes me want to buy it this instant, but I'm definitely enjoying it enough that I want it on my shelf. I want to pick it up when I need something fun and comforting, and I want to see what happens between these two lovebirds. The next book I read was a hefty one, and that, well, it's, you know, it's a comic, so it's not 1,000 pages, but it's hefty in the edition that I got. So this is The Rift, which is in the Avatar: The Last Airbender comic series, and it's the library bind-up edition, so I believe it encapsulates 4 volumes, which are like, which I think in those they have like 4 or 8 single issues, so it's a whole lot, but it's this whole one story arc. As you can kind of see from the cover, there's a little bit of a stress going on between Aang and Toph and their opposing views, which I always find really interesting, because that was the really great thing that I liked about Toph in the show. I think that was the balance that they sort of needed when she came into it. This arc starts with Aang's going with his air acolytes, and some of the other people, including Toph, team up with him to go on this spiritual journey. So Aang is trying to teach as much as he can to the air acolytes. Even though they haven't done airbending, they learn to follow the monk religion and things like that. They go to celebrate this festival that they celebrate every year, that Aang doesn't actually know the reason why they celebrate the festival, because back before he became the boy in the ice block for 100 years, he didn't care to find out, and they thought that they had all this time. But anyways, it means a lot to him. Aang's very spiritual in that respect, and when they go there, they actually find that this meadow that they're supposed to be celebrating this festival in, there is a town that's built there now, and it's a mining town, and there's this big plant that is processing different gems using mainly benders, but they're also using some technology to, I guess, well, not just but just in general world building. The technology is there because, as we know in real life, war advances technology a lot, and this is sort of, I enjoy that because it's starting to show sort of bridging like the gap between like there being very minimal technology during the TV show, and then we then jump forward to Korra's timeline where there is actually a lot of technology. So that was really cool to see. Cool and also bad. It frustrated me though, because there was a point in there where they talked about how they didn't want the technology to be too advanced, and they know with the power source wise it couldn't be electricity. So they're acknowledging that, but then there's massive plot holes where you can see that there's like a cord somewhere. They don't say that it's plugged into electricity, but they don't say what the machine is actually plugged into, what power source there was. So it felt a little bit silly to me that they haven't actually, from my knowledge, discovered electricity, but then they've somehow got these machines that are. And then bloody like Sokka starts whirring around on a forklift that they own. And it was very clearly a forklift. I was really mad at this because I just felt like, come on guys, did it have to be a forklift? I feel like no, it could have been something else. And I just feel like the jump that they did from directly after Avatar's timeline to then having a forklift, it was really ridiculous for me, and I think it was quite a silly decision. If anyone can refute me with like actual evidence, that would be cool, but I just feel like the jump was too big to have like no cars or anything like this in this time, but there's a forklift. We have some development from Toph. This book was mainly about her and her like relationships, and that was really cool. I really enjoyed that. I wish I could see this stuff as a TV show because I feel like it could pack like such a big punch, and they do as well as they can with the comics, but it doesn't quite make the mark that the TV show did. I'm still glad to have more Avatar comic content though, so you know. It was good. It was a good time. I really enjoyed it. I read through it really quickly, and I can't wait to read the next volume whenever I purchase that one. And then the last book that I've read this 2 months, at the end of October, I read it last night. I finished it last night, and that is Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban in the Mina Lima edition. I was so excited to get my hands in this one, and look at that cover. Oh my gosh, it's actually gonna dethrone the Philosopher's Stone. Not that I don't love that one, but I'm not as into red. It doesn't sort of soothe my soul in the way, and this is just gorgeous. The second one, I thought it was like cute, but not, you know, it's pretty, but it's not like as spectacular as the first one was. But now, you know, I've looked at that one for years. I've seen it, and I'm ready for a change. So this one I'm going to put on display as soon as I finish filming this video, and I'm so excited because it is so gorgeous. Oh my god. I think these are actually my favourite over the Jim Kay editions, which are not so much going to be Jim Kay because he's taken a break from that now. I still have to get number 5, but the last 2 books are going to be illustrated by someone else that hasn't been announced yet. What do I have to say about Prisoner of Azkaban as someone who's read it over lots of times? This one used to be my least favourite. The last time I reread the series, I actually dethroned my last favourite as The Chamber of Secrets, which I actually quite enjoy now, and this one was my least favourite. And I said because the whole Sirius Black stuff, now that I've like read the series so many times, it's not as like it's sort of like reading a thriller again, and you know like what's going to happen and who's the bad guy and things like that. That's how I felt the last time I read it, and because like the character relationships were less of a surprise. So I feel like with this one, it's a lot of character relationships that like build it up. That being said, I really enjoyed it this time. I don't know whether it was the right time in my life or it's been so long since I've actually reread the series again, but I had a wonderful time. It was awesome. Such an enjoyable thing to read. I'm actually a little bit worried that now going on to other books, I'm not going to prioritize reading as much because it's not going to be as enjoyable as this book was for me to read. That being said, I'm on a high having finished that, so hopefully that's what will spur me on. The illustrations are gorgeous, as they always are with the Mina Lima editions. I love how they make things look real. I love how not everybody is beautiful and picture perfect like they kind of have to make in the movies, because I think it's more realistic, especially to the way that I feel like these books are written. So to spoil you guys for a picture, look away if you don't want to see, but this is Sirius Black in the Shrieking Shag, and he actually looks like a scary dude, and I really liked that. I feel like you get more value out of these for the price and more illustrations. I felt like particularly towards the end of these ones that there was a lot more geometrical designs on them as opposed to like actual picture illustrations, and that frustrated me. There we go. There's my review talking about the illustrations instead. Hey guys, I'm inserting this clip here because I actually ended up finishing The Girl with Fire and Thorns by Rae Carson over the last few days. I don't know whether I crossed into November, but not by very much, so I wanted to read it, review it, and either put it on my shelf or unhaul it. As it is, I think I'm going to put it in my no man's land of my shelf, where basically I haven't organised it properly yet. I don't feel like giving it a space yet, but I'm just unsure whether to unhaul this one or not. Ultimately, I'm thinking that I'm not going to continue the series, so I had a really good time with this. I do have a reading blog on it. I had a really good time for the majority of the book, and it wasn't up until the end that things sort of ended the way that they were kind of leading up that it was going to end, but just in a very not satisfying way because it was way too easy. So to rewind a little bit, The Girl of Fire and Thorns is a YA fantasy book. It was published a fair while ago, actually. It's fairly old for this sort of time period, 2011. So, you know, it's getting up there in age. Like, it's not like a classic or anything like that, but it's getting older. It's not recent. I really resonated with Alyssa straight off the bat. Rae Carson's writing style was a little clunky to begin with for me to get used to. I don't know whether it improved as the novel went on or I got more used to it. But despite that, it was Alyssa's personality that really got me to continue with the book. She's someone that feels incredible pressure in her role as second princess, kind of, because she's not going to inherit the kingdom, but all princes and princesses are valuable in some shape or form. Hers ends up being a marriage proposal as well, but also the fact that she's born with the Godstone in her belly button, which means that she is destined for something great, though it's not always apparent whether it's great or not. So there's, I guess, a bit of this overarching, she's not actually sure whether she's going to seemingly achieve the greatness that she's supposed to. And she's also someone who's grown up with a love of eating sweet things, which she herself attributes to the reason that she is fat. And she's always comparing herself to her older sister Elodia, who seems to be slimmer, more talented, more loved than she perceives herself as. Now, I was a little bit disappointed, not a spoiler, but over the arc of this book, Alyssa doesn't actually have the character development to learn that her value is not based on what she looks like. Maybe that's coming in other books, I'm not really sure, but we didn't get this one in here, which was quite disappointing. However, overall this book was actually quite interesting. I was feeling a little bit slumpy towards the middle, so I actually put it down and picked up something else, and then I picked this up again. The romance kicked up a notch from that point, and it really made me enjoy it. Unfortunately, the ending just felt a little bit not great for me. I don't know whether some choices maybe were made about how the ending tied up too neatly by Ray Carson because of the time period that this book was written. I know that when I was actually looking at writing and querying my own novel to trad publishers at the same time that this was published, a lot of the advice were that you weren't even going to get a look in if you couldn't make the first book in your series look like a standalone anyways, because you had no idea whether you were going to continue on or not, and therefore you didn't want to leave readers disappointing. Considering that this book is already fairly large for YA as well at that time, I feel like Ray Carson maybe made some decisions to quickly tie up some threads at the end so that her book was marketable in the time that it was. Sadly for me, that it's left it so that I don't actually care about continuing with the series whatsoever. Everything just felt too neat, too unsatisfactory, like they weren't well won, it was too easy, and I feel like there is a thread that is undone that that the other books are possibly going to grow off, but the ones that would have kept me reading are tied up nicely. So I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do with this book. I actually kind of feel like with some stuff that I've read lately that I might want to actually reorganize my shelves again, but I don't know if I've read enough to justify that. So it may be something that's coming in the first half or at the halfway mark of next year. I feel like I need to do a bit of a revamp, but I don't know whether anything is going to be that drastic that I'm going to need to change everything. Maybe just pulling a few things out that as I've read more and have time to think, I'm going to not prioritize them. But anyways, back to the outro at the end of the other video that I filmed before this. Thank you guys so much for reaching this point in the video. If you came up to this point and you don't know what to comment but you still want to show your support, can you please comment a person emoji? I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm very, very aware that it's the end of the year coming up. I only have one more wrap up now since I do 2 monthly wrap ups, and I'm really thinking about what I want to read. I'm kind of in the middle of a lot of different books. At least 4 I would consider that I'm genuinely in the middle of. I've got A Dance with Dragons and Ship of Magic that I'm both in the middle of that I would really like to finish before the end of the year, and then I'm not really sure. I'm sort of torn. I'm thinking about trying to read some of the smaller books and some of the more graphic ones like comics and mangas so that I can just get a few things off my shelf before the end of the year. We'll see, because I'm a mood reader and things change all the time. So thank you guys again so much for watching my video, and I will chat to you guys next time. I hope you had a good Halloween. Bye!